Bertha, tell me about how the business community is reacting to this and why we're seeing just multiple days of a downward turn in the markets.
You know, Katie, to a certain extent at the beginning, I think people in business were thinking, well, this is part of the negotiation tactic, a lot of bluster. But now as they're seeing these tariffs starting to actually take effect, it is really rattling investors, rattling businesses as well. When you talk about tariffs going up to 50% on Canadian steel and aluminum, they are our biggest trading partner when it comes to those two things, according to the U.S. International Trade Administration. In 2024, the U.S. imported 6 million metric tons of steels, making up about 2/3 of our steel imports, and just over 3 million tons of aluminum, which makes up about 3/4 of imports on that front. For Canada, a pullback would certainly be a big blow because the U.S. accounts for about 90% of its export market in aluminum and steel. Now, when Trump first imposed those 25% tariffs back in the first administration, it mounted into about a 20% decrease in the terms of the imports that came into the country. But 50% from Canada might be a whole different ballgame. In terms of market reaction today, we're seeing automakers lower, except for Tesla, which is bouncing back from a 15% decline yesterday. Meantime, aluminum giant Alcoa and U.S. Steel are higher today, presumably because they would face less competition.
Donald Trump has made it clear that he wants to go after multinational corporations. He says the globalists have been ripping us off, Bertha. I guess what would it mean for him to try to reorder things, to try to take away their power, rehome them here in the United States? Is this a 3-month ordeal? Is it a 3-year ordeal? Is it a 30-year ordeal? How does he do it if he actually wants to do it?
Well, you know, certainly you've seen a number of companies making overtures. Apple saying that it is going to invest on some production here, not for the iPhone. It's very difficult to turn those things on a dime and suddenly bring them home. But you are seeing more companies announce, you know, more production here in the U.S. It doesn't happen overnight. But the overall uncertainty is really starting to filter down and rattle, not just for consumers. We've seen those consumer numbers come in terms of those consumer sentiment come in lower than expected. But just this morning, you had Delta warning that they are seeing a pullback when it comes to both leisure and business travel because of the uncertainty. And you also had the small business Optimum index falling 2 points in February. This is the 4th straight month that we've seen it continue to fall. So a lot of people very uncertain. President Trump is sort of saying this is going to work out in the long run, but certainly in the short run, it's rattling people.
Yeah, he feels like he has the runway. Let's bring in New York Times chief White House correspondent and MSNBC political analyst Peter Baker. I mean, in theory, or in reality, he can't run again. I mean, this is going to be his last term. So does he have the runway, Peter?
Well, look, he's trying to say to people, take a breath. This will all work out in the long run, and maybe it will. But in the short run, obviously, there's a great deal of volatility and a great deal of uncertainty, even among, I think, fellow Republicans and business leaders who thought they were getting an administration that was going to be friendly to them. Yeah, I don't think they ever took this tariffs threat quite as seriously as they are now. They're seeing the on again, off again, escalation, pullback, pause, nature of all this as a deterrent to predictable planning, which is what a lot of businesses want. And I think there's a worry about this is leading to a worse outcome, which would be something of a recession. The president himself acknowledged that possibility just the other day. The last president I can remember who said, "Hey, hang tight for a little bit during some disruption to our economy," was Joe Biden, when he said this inflation will go away as we try to reorder the economy post-COVID. Well, it did go away eventually, but it did a lot of damage in the meantime.
What about the targeting of Canada? He's being particularly vicious with Canada. He posted on Truth Social that there's a $200 billion cost to our relationship with Canada. Doing some digging on that, nobody can figure out where he got that number from. If you're talking about trade, maybe it's $40 billion. But then when you're talking about intelligence sharing, which is something that he mentioned, national security, Peter, explain to me the intelligence relationship between the United States and Canada. Are we basically just protecting them? Are we their shield, as Donald Trump is claiming?
Well, look, it's a two-way relationship. We get a lot out of Canada as well. Obviously, we combine together to defend the North American continent. For instance, in terms of strategic defense, when the president talks about how he wants to have Greenland because he thinks it will be better for American security to have, access to that territory. Well, guess what? The territory that we have in terms of our shared military cooperation with Canada has obviously benefited the United States for a lot of years as well. It's a very odd thing, obviously, to see a United States president at war, in terms of a trade war at least, with Canada. If you had, time traveled from 25 years ago to today, and somebody told you, hey, our biggest enemy would be Canada, our biggest friend would be Russia, Vladimir Putin's Russia, I think a lot of people would have, thought you were making stuff up or smoking something.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Donald Trump wants Canada to be the 51st state. He keeps on saying it. Justin Trudeau, outgoing prime minister, just left, said you got to take him seriously on this, that he wants to hollow out the Canadian economy so that the United States can subsume it. Why does he want Canada to be the 51st state?
Well, it's a great question because, look, this isn't something he ran on. I did a search not that long ago of all of his campaign appearances, all of his, statements and interviews during the 2024 election cycle. Never once talked about Canada becoming the 51st state. This is not a campaign promise. And yet he seems to have adopted this sort of imperialist attitude toward the world these days, saying Canada should be part of the United States. He wants to take over Greenland. He wants to seize the Panama Canal back, maybe even take over Gaza. This is not the same, America first, sort of more isolationist view of the world. It's more of an America first imperialist view of the world. Now, does anybody actually think that the United States is going to subsume Canada? In Washington, no, they don't think that. But he can do a lot of damage, even if he's just using it as a cudgel as part of his trade war with them. And the Canadians are taking it very seriously, and they find it threatening. And in fact, this is changing the politics in Canada, and not to Trump's benefit, by the way. Had he not done this, had he not gone after Canada, it's very likely that in the next election there would have been a conservative prime minister there. Instead, the polls have shifted dramatically back toward the Liberal Party, which was in the political pit, and may give him yet another prime minister who's not a friend of his.
Aaron, any reason to believe that this is thought out policy and these are thought out statements coming from the White House collectively? Or are we to understand that this is just Donald Trump acting as he acted, at least in the first administration, on a whim, airing whatever grievance comes to his mind, whatever idea comes to his mind as it pops into his head?
Well, certainly this most recent instance is one that seems to go with the latter of what you just suggested there, Katie, that the president saw something in the last several hours that made him decide we need to change course as it relates to these steel and aluminum tariffs. We know that 25% tariff was coming. That was on the calendar. March 12th was the date that we were going to see that, and people sort of expected it. In some ways, it had been baked into some of the reactions that we're seeing over the last couple of weeks here. But now today, we have this new action that we know the paperwork hasn't been drawn up on yet, an increase of 25% on aluminum and steel tariffs. And so it would suggest, as you noted, and as was the case in the previous Trump administration, throughout the campaign for that matter, that we would oftentimes wake up in the morning and see there had been a series of posts on social media that seemed to be driving policy. And there's no suggestion at this point that there was already something in the works to increase these tariffs, in particular on Canadian steel and aluminum. And so now with that April 2nd date for reciprocal tariffs around the globe, we'll all be watching to see to what degree that may change between now and then, and if what exactly the additional reaction will be. Because you'll have to remember, Katie, the president said that if there's retaliatory action taken by other countries, they can expect the U.S. to do even more.
Bertha, quickly, Tesla stock. That one did particularly poorly yesterday. What's going on with it today?
Tesla today is bouncing. Last I checked, it was up about 4%, but it's actually down over 50% from its record high back in December. Elon Musk personally has lost more than $100 billion in his own personal wealth because of that stock retrenchment. We're seeing, for example, in China, sales of Teslas fell nearly 50% in February. So it's a very interesting thing to watch. One of the things the president talked about is that he's not going to watch the market moves specifically as a barometer. But one thing, Katie, that people will watch as a barometer is what happens with jobs. And if you start seeing more retrenchment, people spending less, people doing less, more job losses, that is certainly something that the White House will take seriously.
Well, we already see him trying to prop up Tesla stock by saying he's going to buy himself a new Tesla. All right, everybody, thank you very much. Aaron Gilchrist, Bertha Coombs, Peter Baker, appreciate it.